periodically needs to have petroleum in it.
Thank you for entrusting the UU with your gift, and now we will hear from Pastor Charlie.
Morning. We live in America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, where all are created equal, the land of opportunity. These are the ideals of America, but they have not been the reality. American wealth was built upon the killing of Native Americans and stealing their land, then using slave labor to work the land. But from the beginning, there were voices that called us to be better. Two of these voices were Dr. Benjamin Rush, a Universalist, and Ben Franklin, a Unitarian. Together, they joined with Quakers to form the first anti-slave society in America on this date, in 1775. And that's the reason why my son, my youngest son, if you ever get to meet him, is named Benjamin, because of that event. The first abolition society in the United States, a number of men met at the Sun Tavern in Philadelphia and adopted a constitution for what they called the Society for the Relief of Free Negroes Unlawfully Held in Bondage. An author, Raymond Turner, writes about this in the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography. The society had been organized primarily to further the abolition of slavery. But in Pennsylvania, that work had already progressed so far that the widest opportunity lay rather in assisting free Negroes and helping them to retain their freedom. Because Pennsylvania was right there on the Mason-Dixon line, it would be very easy to kidnap people who were free and say, "You are now slaves." Sometimes the society paid a master to give liberty to a slave, and sometimes the master was assured that he would not be held chargeable, as the law ordained, in case the Negro manumitted failed to support himself. So they see the structure of the laws were, if you free your slave, and then your slave then needs public assistance, you're going to be liable. So the laws were set up even for those who wanted to free their slaves would be punished by the law if anything went wrong. The Act of 1780 officially abolished slavery for the future and did not deprive masters of the blacks they already owned. In other words, the Act provided for gradual abolition. And then in the operation, some cases were very gradual indeed. There being a slave in the state, it is said, as late as 1860. But as early as 1790, Ben Franklin wrote to the U.S. Congress, "From persuasion that equal liberty was originally the portion and still is the birthright of all men, and influenced by the strong ties of humanity, they earnestly entreat your serious attention to the subject of slavery, that you will be pleased to countenance restoration of liberty to those unhappy men who alone in this land of freedom are degraded into perpetual bondage, and who amidst the general joy of surrounding freemen are groaning in servile subjection, And you will devise means for removing this inconsistency from the character of the American people, that you will promote mercy and justice. Well, Congress kind of ignored that, even though Ben Franklin was a founding father. And then in Pennsylvania, after the turn of the century, there was rising prejudice. And so the society focused their utmost to appease the white people and to teach blacks to behave in such a manner as to win respect. The idea was, let's be concerned about these poor white people who are losing their slaves. This soft approach did not cause Southerners to give up their slaves. And it was very evident these type of gentle persuasion movements of abolition were replaced by the more radical abolitionist movements of John Brown and William Lloyd Garrison. There is this appeasement of evil that is still done today. In 2016, many voted based on the slogan, "Make America Great Again." And it was always vague about when this era of greatness was. But it was more than hinted at that greatness was when whites, and particularly white men, were in control, when brown people were less prevalent in society, and when women had less control over their reproductive organs. Racism and sexism are deplorable. But calling racist and sexist deplorable was viewed as a political mistake by both people on the right and the left. Both the right and the left moved to appease the people who might be offended. White males who asserted the superiority of whiteness or maleness needed to be won with kindness. Politicians must be careful not to offend them. Yet the right and the conservatives and the sexists and the racists had not been shy about name-calling on the left. Mexicans were called racists. Feminists were called feminazis. Black people were routinely called thugs. And Muslims, of course, were called terrorists. And anybody who complained about this name-calling was called a snowflake. Oh, you poor thing. You so weak. Well, I'm proud to be a snowflake. And I hope that some of you are snowflakes too. And I call upon other snowflakes to join me so we can create a blizzard of justice. If we keep silent and have our little voice quiet on the sidewalk, we'll melt away and we'll be ignored. But we have to join together and make our voice heard. The Make America Great Again crowd complain that the elite call them names like racist and sexist. But racist and sexist are not name-calling. They are descriptions of behavior. They are not immutable characteristics like gender or race or nationality or place of origin that then you attribute horrible things to. These are horrible things that are practiced by particular people, and the way that we stop being called racist or sexist is to stop those behaviors and work to undo the racism and sexism inherent in society. In California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, there are families that have lived there for generations before any Northern Europeans came. Yet they are the ones who have their citizenship questioned, even though their Spanish ancestors have lived in the area since the 1500s. And many of those Spanish ancestors made families with the indigenous populations who had lived there for over 15,000 years. And our history of the West. Much of the West was cleared by government troops. It was a nasty business. And after the Civil War, one of the few jobs that freed blacks were able to get was to go west and join the cavalry and become buffalo soldiers. And they were hired to fight in the Indian Wars. But these black soldiers were not fighting for themselves, other than the small pittance of not starving to death on that particular day. They fought for the laws of for white settlers. They were even forbidden by law from settling in Oregon. Oregon's Constitution had a provision that only white people would settle there when they were entered into the nation. Now, blacks were not forbidden to be homesteaders, but wherever they did set up, they were resisted. The most successful black settlement in the West was destroyed in 1921, less than 100 years ago. A white mob in Tulsa burned 35 square blocks where black people lived. It's estimated that over 200 black people died and over 10,000 became homeless. But this event in history is not called a terrorist attack. But what else is it? Defenders of the status quo resist change, and they complain about anybody who complains. The right accuses the left of using identity politics. Yet it's been the powerful who created the categories. And so that when a woman complains about injustice, she is accused of causing division by mentioning the injustice. When people of color complain, they are accused of causing division. When members of a sexual minority complain that they're being targeted, they are accused of causing division. When members of a religious minority complain, they are accused of causing division. When victims of rape and other violence complain, they are accused of causing division. Racism and sexism and all the isms of America are like a family secret. And if any of you have families, I imagine some of you have family secrets. And in those family secrets, there are people who say, we just don't talk about that. Can't you just forget about that? It's best that we pretend that that never happened. It's the idea that issues will go away if ignored, and that the problem is people bringing up the issue. And we set about our lives in convenient ways so we don't have to look at ugly truths. UUs, more than any other faith, have been successful at promoting the rights of women and sexual minorities. But our racism work lags behind. We have a legacy of abolition and civil rights work, and we have helped bring about social change. But the change within our congregations, as we look around, we can see has been minimal. We have excelled at critiquing society, but find it more difficult to work on ourselves. Earlier in this sermon, I talked about the right and the left and an us and them type of way. And I failed to recognize the complexity of this. Because many of us have voted the right way, have given to the right causes, the correct causes, and we have done all these things. So if somebody says, yeah, you still might be racist. I, a man who am married to a black woman, still might be racist. That causes a bristling. It causes a defensiveness of saying, wait a minute, how dare you accuse me of not doing all the work I have done? But the problem is so huge that our individual efforts aren't enough. We have to look at ways to get beyond ourselves. Out on the table of things happening out there in the coffee hour, I urge any of you to pick one of these up. Our local North Carolina action group, Forward Together, is offering a 3-session April 28th, May 5th, and May 12th online discussion of a book by Robin DiAngelo called White Fragility. Why is it so hard for white people to talk about racism? And there is also, you can go to the site online and you can download the discussion guide. And even if you don't have time to read the book, they have quotes of the book which give plenty of fodder for discussion. One of the quotes is, race scholars use the term white supremacy to describe a social, political, economic system of domination based on racial categories that benefits those who are perceived as white. Our umbrage at the term white supremacy only serves to protect the process it describes and obscure the mechanisms of racial inequality. White supremacy is more than the idea that supports whites are superior to people of color. It's a deeper premise that supports this idea. The definition of white as the norm or standard for human, and people of color as a deviation. And the reading that Rebecca did before this sermon speaks to that. White is the blank paper on which other things are written. White becomes invisible. And anything that is deviant from that is, everything that is different from white is considered deviant. Deviant from the norm. Something not right. And we see it in odd things. We see it in the compassion towards white people who are addicted to opiates and a call to provide service versus the mandatory sentencing perpetrated against African Americans during the crack epidemic. And we see it in our politics, that concern about the forgotten white working class, so critical to the outcome of the last presidential election, with no concern for blacks who remain on the bottom of virtually every social and economic measure. To put it bluntly, this is the author writing of White Fragility writing. To put it bluntly, I believe that the white collective fundamentally hates blackness for what it reminds us of, that we are capable and guilty of perpetrating immeasurable harm, and that our gains come through the subjugation of others. And in her book, she has a chapter called White Women's Tears. And she talks about the dynamic that she sees in many of her race workshops that she's conducted. And she goes, whether intended or not, when a white woman cries over some aspect of racism, all energy goes to her and takes attention for the topic of ameliorating racism. If someone says, I'm crying because I feel guilty, this is so sad, then all of a sudden it's, let's fix this sadness. So maybe we need to live with that sadness for a while. D'Angelo quotes a woman of color who was in no mood for white women's tears after yet another shooting of an unarmed black man. You are crying because you are uncomfortable with your feelings when we are barely allowed to have any. You are ashamed of some such things and cry, but we are not allowed to have any feelings because we are being difficult. We're supposed to remain stoic and strong because then otherwise we become angry or scary people. And this is the hard thing when we see something happen and you watch the TV work hard to say, this isn't racism. Recently, 3 churches in the South were burned by the white son of a white sheriff. And they say, we're unsure of what the motive is. And then people suggest a different motive. That this son, who was the son of a sheriff, listened to a Norwegian anti-Christian metal known as black metal. I don't know how it becomes black metal when it's being portrayed by Norwegians, but it's that language thing that black equals evil. And so, but this wasn't attacking us all Christians. No white Christian churches were burned. But there was this sense of the idea that racism exists is so terrible. Let's defend against this possibility, even in obvious cases. And it's so hard to focus on race because there are so many other issues out there. But whatever your pet issue is, it's worse for black people in that issue. Women earn less than men. And black women earn less than white women. Global warming affects us all, but people of color are living in warmer areas that are becoming unlivable, and when they migrate out of need to cooler, whiter areas, they are being perceived as the problem for the global warming that they didn't create. They are an immigration problem. Transgender people are vilified and attacked, but the murder rate for black transgender people is higher than for whites. Classism should unify white people and people of color. But the 1% of the wealthiest encourage white people to blame poverty, programs, and immigration for their problems. Divide and conquer is the racist strategy those on top use to avoid the bottom from rising up. Unitarian Universalists are a religious minority, but because we are predominantly white, we have a position where we can complain louder than our numbers merit. But if you are a religious minority that is perceived of a different race, it's different. When you're talking and complaining, you are destroying the fabric of this so-called Christian nation. That's why I encourage those who can to participate in the white fragility discussion online. And I'm going to order the book and try to set a date where people can do it here in person and do this talk. And it's difficult. It's difficult work. But it's something that we have to face because it's the invisible family secret that affects so many things. And we can't rest on the laurels of our UU heroes like Benjamin Rush and Benjamin Franklin, who did tremendous work in the past. Because the issue of race evolves like a disease. Every generation creates some antibiotics to get rid of some of it. Like civil rights laws that made it actually illegal to do it out in the open. So now we have to fight how racism has mutated to all the subtle things where people say it isn't about race, but it really is. We are called to fight the battles of this generation. May we be up to the task. I've given you a downer sermon. I have no real solution for you other than hard work. But I offer this song. The song number 1017 in your hymnal. Because I think music sometimes is able to give us some of the energy to do the hard work in front of us. It's number 1017, Building a New Way.